Children and families are in crisis. More than ever, they're being exposed to violence, abuse and neglect. And the fallout is devastating. Welcome to Stories from Berry Street, a podcast that explores how one of Australia's largest independent children and family services organisations dedicates itself to keeping children, young people and families safe, thriving and hopeful. I'm your host, Richelle Hunt. Join me as I talk to some extraordinary people at Berry Street and discover the realities of working in child protection and family violence spaces, the incredible work that's being done to address the rising tide of harm and violence, and what we as a community can do to help.
We know from the Disability Royal Commission and other research that there is a significant overrepresentation of family violence among people with disability. Women and girls with disability in particular are, I think, twice as likely to experience family violence.
That's Terry Symonds, CEO of Street and Yooralla. The recent merger between two of Australia's longest-serving and most respected social service providers is historic. It's an obvious union when you consider that at least 50% of young people coming into out-of-home care have a visible or unseen disability. Women with disability are more likely to be impacted by family violence, experience more severe forms of violence, and face greater barriers to accessing support. And so many people living with a disability are also experiencing the effects of trauma. Joining the discussion is Jenny McNaughton, Deputy CEO, who I spoke with in episode 1 of this podcast. And we spoke about the current state of the system and the need for it to be reimagined. Stories from Berry Street has reflected the values and will of the organisation to innovate, to create change and support people experiencing violence, trauma and abuse. And it has now come full circle with the Yooralla merger, which offers the exciting potential to expand services to better meet a range of intersecting needs. So what will the merger look like? How will people affected by disability, family violence and trauma be supported? We'll get to all of this and much more as I begin the conversation with Terry Symonds. So congratulations, it's big news that Berry Street and Yooralla have merged. But on the face of it, they are two very different organisations. So why the desire to merge?
Thanks, Richelle. Great to be able to talk about it. We're very excited too. From Yooralla's perspective, I guess we've become more and more aware over the years that the NDIS, while it delivers life-changing supports to a significant number of people, the majority of people with disabilities in Australia are not on the NDIS. They present with a range of different needs for support and sometimes complex overlapping challenges in other sectors, in all parts of society. And so if Yooralla's true to its mission, I guess we've thought we need to reach out beyond the NDIS and look for partnerships elsewhere in other sectors to try to really meet the needs of people with disability wherever they present, live, work, play.
Jenny, how will this change?
It will be a wonderful thing from a Berry Street perspective. We know that we have numbers of young people in schools, in out-of-home care, in our foster care programs that live with disability, and that we are unable to meet those needs in a way that we really want to. We want to become a hugely disability-confident organisation. In some ways, Child Protection acknowledges that they have difficulty with placing young people with disability, and we hope to be able to be part of the solution so that young people can either stay at home, we're safe to do so, or be in a really disability-confident environment where they're safe, happy and thriving.
It's this wonderful collection of resources now, this sort of merging of two great minds that come together with one singular outcome and desire, really, isn't it?
Yeah, both organisations have a deep, deep knowledge and experience. They're both over 100 years old. They were both founded on a vision of doing better for children who are missing out for one reason or another. And over the time, both organisations have expanded, as you say, into a range of different programs and got terrific expertise and practitioners. Both organisations, I think, have also experimented over the last few years. of working together and reaching out and working across sectors. So I know that in Yooralla we have spent for the last couple of years time working in the out-of-home care sector, providing specialist therapeutic supports, and so that's an observation that we've made, and it's one of the reasons why I think we've been able to make a difference when we've gone into out-of-home care, because our specialists can then sit with those young people, help them get assessments if they need those, help them get the evidence that's required to then win them the funding, which they're entitled to but have missed out on because of the circumstances they're in. And we can tell now that that's made a difference to the safety of those houses, safety of young people, safety of staff, but importantly also the longer-term outcomes that we expect, because those young people are getting access to supports they need. So we've had the opportunity to experiment and learn. I know Berry Street's been doing experimentation with disability services as well, so I think we've got some experience now that's informed the kind of ideas around what might be possible on a larger scale when we merge.
Does it give you more strength? Does it give you more power, so to speak, in order to prove the work that you do, the results that you have, given that you're both such credible organisations now coming together as one?
I think it's less about strength and power. It's more about being able to see and respond to things that we might have missed in the past. So if I think about family violence, for example, we know from the Disability Royal Commission and other research that there is a significant overrepresentation of family violence among people with disability. Women and girls with disability in particular are, I think, twice as likely to experience family violence. Research by Our Watch and Women with Disabilities Victoria found 2/3 of women with disabilities have experienced gender-based violence in some form. And yet in Yooralla, because we're not a specialist family violence provider, we're unlikely, I think, to have seen that, even though it might be right in front of us among the people that we serve.
As a society, as a community, how can we support these women?
I guess there's two comments to make, Richelle. One is that women with disabilities or victim survivors of family violence who have a disability are subject to not just power and oppressive behaviours on the basis of gender, for example, but also ableism. And the Disability Royal Commission did a good job. They listened to brave witnesses and expert witnesses who talked about the intersection of ableism and other forms of oppression and disadvantage, such that if coercive control, for example, or restriction of rights are normalised for people with disabilities, including in the disability sector, I might add, then it makes it more likely that they're going to fall victim to coercive control that has a gender basis or lead to other forms of violence. And so the intersection of ableism and discrimination against people with disability makes it more likely that they're going to be subject to other forms of violence. So in terms of how to support them, we need to think about how to wind back all forms of restrictive practice, how to give people more autonomy, more choice, more control over their lives, knowing that if we do that, they'll not just be able to better control supports they get because of their disability, but better able to withstand coercive control or other forms of violence on a gender basis. So
it's a big job. How could this merger help influence the system and actually advocate for change?
We're really optimistic about what services we'll be able to provide, better services, more comprehensive services. But ultimately, I think our vision is not only about services. And I do want to make the point that bigger services is not the solution. The solution is a community that supports every individual regardless of their needs and backgrounds. And so part of what we're hoping for here is not just better services, but also advocacy and influence on policy and on systems that we work in and on community ultimately, so that people don't need the range of services eventually that they might need today. So I think our mission is about service delivery, but our vision really is about a community that is supportive for people, not just bigger and better services.
And I guess that then raises the idea of, well, what does disability actually look like? You know, how does it present? And how has our understanding of disability as a society changed?
Yeah, great question, Richelle. I think once upon a time, people thought about disability as being people in wheelchairs, people with physical disabilities or sensory impairments. But I think our understanding of disability has widened in a couple of ways. I mean, firstly is the move to a social model, so we understand that actually disability is caused by society. It's not something inherent in individuals. But also we understand now that there are people who have developmental delays, for example, or are neurodivergent. They think differently to perhaps our view of how people might think, and that doesn't need to be disabling. But in a society that is set up for people who think and behave in a certain way, that can be disabling. And it presents, for example, as behaviours. So if they're people in their own home or with their families where they might express themselves in ways that seem angry or seem combative or aggressive, then that can be seen as bad behaviour or problematic behaviour, and it might mean that they get into contact with the justice system, for example. Or we can think about it as actually them expressing their frustration and emotional responses to the way in which they think and the way in which they're trying to understand their world. And that itself is a very common scenario for families and young people, for example, who come to us and where I think our teams can help. And I'm sure it's very common in Berry Street as well.
Jenny, this would be incredible information to put into your work and practice.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about Terry's comment that up to 65% of women with disability experience family violence, I know even as a specialist family violence service, we're not meeting that need. We might only have one disability specialist advisor for thousands of referrals. And in the current system, disability can't be a ticker box. It is currently a ticker box that a worker might be confident enough to ask about, or it might be glossed over because the disability is unseen, and we really need to remove those barriers to service access.
So what's the experience for vulnerable people in all of these systems right now? So starting with you, Terry, what's the landscape like in the disability sector? What examples for you spring to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think about people who miss out, for example, on funded supports. The experience of people with disabilities is that it's a bit of a, not quite a postcode lottery, but there are certainly factors that provide unfair access to supports. To get into the NDIS is a fairly complicated set of hoops to jump through. There are significant investments in time, and if you're a young person trying to get in, you've really got to have people in your corner willing to bat over a long period of time to get you access to supports. And many of the young people that Berry Street would see just don't have those people in their corner. Or if they're there, they're not there in the same way that they might be for other young people. And so that's one observation we've got about the experience of vulnerable people in the disability system now.
And Jenny, how do things stand from your perspective, operating in the child protection and out-of-home care systems? What are you seeing?
We're seeing more families stressed more than ever before, and particularly families that are living with a child with a disability. I've had lots of conversations with parents where the advice from child protection is to relinquish their child, relinquish their young one into the system so that they get the support they need. And right now is a difficult time for a lot of families. But then when you are managing some of the behaviours Terry talked about and you're not getting any support, I imagine that that does lead to some protective issues because sometimes parents just can't cope anymore, and we want to be able to stem that flow. The number of young people coming into care living with autism is through the roof, particularly young men, and it's not set up for young men with autism. So you think about our residential care homes, which is a home that is staffed 24/7, and someone with autism would like stability, consistency, and we don't have those things in those homes because you're living with 4 children together with really diverse needs, and it's busy and it's unpredictable, and that's not what these young people need. And we see that children in the child protection system aren't receiving the same NDIA access or NDIS supports. The workers, the busy caseworkers, will be absolutely committed to the child, but even they are sometimes baffled by what's required of them. And I see the difference when a child has a parent in their corner as opposed to a system in their corner, and it is chalk and cheese. There has to be an absolute drive and commitment to get these packages through, and we want the children in our care, which are the most vulnerable children in the state, to have priority access to all of these supports, because trauma and disability together are very complex, and trauma alone can create disability effect. So, we really need to do better.
So how could life look different for people who have multiple sets of needs? What could some of the new services look like?
As we design new services, we'll be listening to the people who need those services and trying to get their guidance and expertise as much as possible. We have a firm commitment to involve people more than either organisation, I think, has in the past in the design and leadership of service delivery. Having said that, if I think about what happens to young people who leave out-of-home care, for example, they often face unemployment, they face contact with the justice system, they face homelessness. If I think about the experience of people with disabilities, they're often excluded from mainstream employment, they face limited options in terms of home and housing, and they're overrepresented in the justice system. So if I think about what could be different, I can think about joint efforts to create a better menu of highly customised housing, for example, that might meet the needs of people who come from different backgrounds. I can think of partners we have in the employment space who are keen to help people with disabilities get vocational certificates and qualifications and get the support they need on the job for meaningful employment. Why couldn't those supports be turned towards young people exiting out-of-home care to make sure there are bridges and pathways for them? So I can think about platforms that we could build off and extend that will apply to different cohorts that we serve in different areas.
What about you, Jenny? What are you looking forward to with the merger in terms of just new offerings?
I think one of the key ones for me is the understanding of trauma and disability. I think that it's fair to say that some people with disabilities don't experience any trauma, but for many, they have experienced trauma of exclusion or not being able to access the world in the same way as other people. Any type of othering can cause that feeling of trauma. So for us to be able to meet service users with that dual understanding, I think will be very profound, because I think people will feel seen and heard and understood in a way the system hasn't understood them yet.
So on a personal note, what excites you, Terry, about the potential of this newly merged organisation?
What excites me is the chance to try different things. It's really to innovate. If I think about an example of a parent of one of our clients who I met with the week after the merger was announced, and she described to me parents she knew, not parents of children with disabilities, but parents with disabilities. And she described how they are judged and discriminated against as parents and sometimes lose their children. They're removed by the state because people judge their ability to parent. And she said to me, is it possible that an organisation that is confident in dealing with intellectual disability and also offers a range of parenting and family supports could provide tailored parenting supports for parents with an intellectual disability? And of course, I heard that question and my immediate response was, of course, that is absolutely what we'll be able to do. She said, there aren't many of those things around. And I said, well, that's exactly the kind of innovation that our organisation might be able to do. We're not experts in parenting, but we do know things about supporting people with intellectual disabilities. Berry Street don't have the same expertise in intellectual disability, but have vastly more experience in parenting, supports and working with families. And together it's hard to believe we couldn't come up with the kind of solution that she was hoping for. So that's the kind of thing that really excites me.
What role do potential philanthropists play here when you hear a solution like that? What's their role in this?
I think their role is helping us prove a case, sometimes for government. They might be things that we can fund ourselves, but often these things to get scaled up are going to need government support. But government, even if they get it, they're cautious. And so for us, philanthropic support is an opportunity to help make a case, help prove something in practice, sometimes on a small scale, and then take that to government and others and say, look, it works on a small scale. Imagine what we could do at scale. We've done that with our work in out-of-home care. We've supported 120 young people over the last 2 years. And now we have interest from government in what that might look like if they funded it to work across the state, because we've got the outcomes from those first 2 years. That originally was funded by philanthropy. That's a great example of how philanthropy can really help us prove in practice some of the innovative ideas we're going to hopefully develop.
As we've been saying throughout this entire podcast, Jenny, it takes a village. We know it's a statement that many of us use, but it's the reality, really, isn't it? It does take a village.
Yeah. And we need our community to back us, to not stay silent when they see things and hear things, to actually be with us in solving some of the trickiest problems that this community has, because we need the whole support. We need systemic change. We need relational change. We need to change the way we approach many, many tasks to improve outcomes for very, very young children. And I hope the community hears that they need to be with us.
Well, two such well-known and respected organisations, and the community has never needed help and needed assistance and needed guidance more. So I personally think this is a really exciting and a huge step forward for those who need it the most. So I wish you both all the best, and to all of your teams as well.
Thank you, Richelle.
Thanks, Richelle.
Thank you, Richelle.
Thanks, Richelle.
Thank you, Richelle.
In this podcast series, Stories from Berry Street, we've spoken about trauma, family violence, childhood neglect and abuse. Some really confronting issues faced by vulnerable people in our communities and what Berry Street has been doing to change the system for better outcomes. With the coming together of two large organisations who are working with vulnerable people across different systems, we can see even more impactful change on the horizon. This could be a real reimagining of systems to deliver better outcomes for people right across our communities who deserve to look forward to their future with the same ambitions, desires and hope that we all do. But Berry Street Yooralla can't do it alone. As I've realised time and time again through this series, it really does take a village. We all have a part to play in making our communities thriving and inclusive places for everyone. You've been listening to Stories from Berry Street, a podcast for Berry Street, produced by Sound Cartel. Find out more about how you can support Berry Street at berrystreet.org.au. Listen out for more episodes on everything from bringing a new model of care to Victoria, healing childhood trauma, and trauma-informed education. Subscribe free wherever you listen to podcasts. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic, family or sexual violence, please contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1800 737 732. This podcast is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and Berry Street acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of the lands, skies and waterways across Australia.